Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening. Welcome, ironradio.org listeners. Phil is away, Mike is away, this is Lonnie Lowery, and I am going to give you a little bit of news this week as these guys are in a seminar out in Boatsman, Montana. Jarrell is away as well, so we're just going to do a little bit of news about nootropics, and then we're going to go to a very quick break and then follow up with a past seminar that Phil and I did. It's been a couple of years ago now, but it really never saw the light of day. So we're going to do that in honor of the seminar that they're doing now, and we'll get you those clips probably next week.
Strength and muscle sport news.
So let's get to the news. Mike and I, when we were in Florida, we saw a lot of different booths with different types of drugs and supplement type of things coming down the pike. One of them was Levagen, and this is definitely not an ad for them, but this is PEA. So this is palmitoyl ethanolamide, which is why they just say PEA. And a paper came out very recently about this, and it just appeared in Ergolog, which I suggest people go check out. I think they do a pretty good job of reporting on all this cool mental and physical, again, drugs and supplements coming down the pike. The title here, More BDNF and Better Memory Through Supplementation with PEA. So this is a lipid-like molecule, part of the extended, if you will, cannabinoid family. The title of the paper that just appeared in Nutrients from Kim and colleagues, formulated palmitoyl ethanolamide supplementation improves parameters of cognitive function and BDNF levels in young, healthy adults, a randomized crossover trial. Now that's going to come up later. So think randomized crossover trials. It's kind of an industry standard. You get a control group, you get a treatment group, and you track them over time and kind of look at the slope of the lines, who's going up, who's going down. Anyway, it says, funded by GenCore, the researchers at the University of Westminster studied the cognitive effect of PEA on healthy young men and women. I should point out, the researchers, if you go look at the full study, had a 27% dropout rate. That kind of sucks. Nobody wants to see that happen. It's really not that uncommon to see a 25% dropout rate, though, in these kinds of extended, over time, longitudinal types of studies. Anyway, they also had limited dietary control. And there are some things in the diet, I think soybeans, some sources of PEA in the diet that could kind of screw with the effects. But I'm going to guess it's not completely contaminating. Anyway, total of 54 subjects were either on placebo or supplemented. Now, the Ergolog paper says 600 milligrams of PEA. I believe it's 700 milligrams. If you go look at the paper, every day on 2 different occasions for 6 weeks. I will give you a direct quote from the paper here. It says, cognitive test battery demonstrated improvement in memory with PEA supplementation through better first success and fewer errors, and those were statistically significant. It is worth noting there are many ways to look at cognition. They did use a long-standing test. I don't really have any problems with the validity or reliability of the testing that they used. Cognitive testing is very difficult, so much so that I've seen food industry companies kind of back away from cognitive claims because they're like, oh God, this is too complicated to even explain to the public, right? I mean, just to quote a recent slide from ISSN just 2 weeks ago or so, there's sensation and perception, attention, there's psychomotor processing, there's processing speed, memory, logic and reasoning, problem solving, language and verbal. You get the idea. There's all these different cognitive functional domains. It becomes a challenge. But the 2 that they chose here to highlight that were significant, they are legitimate tests. Now, these researchers did something I like, which is get a subjective or kind of performance test and then match that with some type of very objective test, like a mechanistic type of thing. Here it was BDNF. So it says PEA increased the concentration of BDNF in the blood. So brain-derived neurotrophic factor, it's something that would logically relate to better performance. They say here on Ergolog, the researchers did not say exactly how much BDNF they found before the supplementation. In other words, they're reporting change scores and they're using these sort of bar graphs. So here's my aside. Dr. Antonio and I recently had a chat about this after he listened to our last Iron Radio episode. We were talking about analyzing change scores in studies like they did here compared to doing what, in my opinion, is a traditional approach, which is using a two-way analysis of variance, ANOVA. This is really just for you research geeks. But using an ANOVA and then using carefully chosen follow-up tests provides more information, and it does it in a safe manner, in my opinion. Like I said, just for you research nerds, because the important thing is that we fairly assess a specific hypothesis, and we look for that signal-to-noise ratio, right, to see if the results can be counted on again and again. Let me give you an example of why this may matter to people who are into research design. I mean, some folks don't care if a conclusion says, there was an 11% rise in the treatment group that was not seen in the placebo group. Okay, that sounds good. As compared to the treatment group ended up 11% higher than the placebo group. Do you see how that's different? One is a change, like a slope of a line, if you did a line graph, which these researchers did not, as far as I can tell, compared to just talking about what happened after the fact. So again, it's just something to consider. Joey Antonio, he likes to keep it simple. And again, we were talking about this because his research group analyzed some change scores. He likes to keep that simple approach. I tend to, again, do that analysis and not do the simple change scores, or what they call gain scores, because unless the graph clearly shows what's going on at baseline and the end of the study, it's really hard to know exactly what happened, right, as far as the intervention in the control group. This current study on PEA, it just showed bar graphs, again, as far as I could tell, and that change scores were harder to determine these sorts of things from. There weren't line graphs, and that kind of makes it hard to know as where each group started at the beginning and where they ended up. So that is what led to the reporting being problematic, right? In the ergo log, people had to go dig for additional information, even looking at other studies, because that information wasn't reported. Again, that's why I like the ANOVA, if you will, with the post hoc, with the follow-up test. They just provide more information there. Dr. Antonio would point out that, yeah, if you graph it properly, it's a legitimate way to look at it, the change scores. Yeah, it is. I mean, there's lots of statistical literature looking at whether change scores, or what we might call gain scores, are just as good, right? We just do a dependent t-test on these gain scores and whether or not that's any better than running an ANOVA or something, or even just looking at post scores and then adjusting them for baseline scores, which is called an ANCOVA. There's lots of ways to do this. Anyway, moving on. The conclusion from ErgoLog is, they quote, the increase in serum BDNF levels within the PEA treatment group, accompanied by enhancements in memory and cognitive performance, suggests the potential of formulated bioavailable PEA supplements to be practical, nootropic, or nutraceutical. That's pretty interesting stuff. Now, what about other possibilities? Well, I'm very interested in coffee, as a lot of you know, and this immediately made me think of some of the BDNF studies. And again, think about like a growth factor that can help neurons connect and grow from whole coffee cherry extracts. But it's not just that. I mean, you can find similar research, curcumin and zinc, blueberries, red grape. They're talking about a lot of these potential nootropics in this paper. I would also add lutein, lion's mane. So there's a list of things you might want to think about. I have dealt with what I think is long COVID brain fog, and this is one way to kind of address that, as is N-acetylcysteine, which is something that I talked about on Nutrition Radio during 2023 when we were doing that little tangent. So there's your nootropic breakdown. I'm actually holding a bottle of Levagen in my hand right now. I am curious about this cannabinoid-related thing. It's not just for cognitive health. Joint health is on their list when you go to their website. I'm just panning through this. A little bit of recovery, immune health, inflammation, which I think is very much related to both the brain and the joint thing. It is interesting to me. I'm fascinated by some of these alternative lipids. Okay, so having said that, let's go to break, and then we're going to actually go just to look at some interviews that we were doing with some lifters that attended one of Phil's seminars. I was just there for the nutritional content, but for the lifting stuff, I mean, I was a bodybuilder. Bodybuilders don't have nearly the same, in my opinion, most of them at least, acumen when it comes to specific nuances of lifting. And we're just about, being a tissue assassin and doing enough muscle micro trauma to cause hypertrophy and growth. But anyway, so some interesting interviews coming at you here just for a little while after break. And then I'll check back in with you before we're done. Hey everybody, Iron Radio is back, and in an expanded way. What can you expect? Well, first, you can get it simulcast every week on the nutritionradio.org network, as well as on the original podcast. It'll appear regularly on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting sites. We have a new Iron Radio / Nutrition Radio Facebook page as well. Please check us out. We're even backed up on YouTube. We hope that an expanded presence will get you the news, education, banter, and guests that's made Iron Radio's community so loyal from the start. You are appreciated. Okay, so my question for you is, what are you learning right now? What are you trying to accomplish?
So I'm Joe Poland. I'm from Indianapolis. Right now we're working on deadlifts with Phil. I'm about 6'2" and change, and I have a long torso, and sometimes I don't really know how exactly my squat should compare to, let's say, the standard squat. And Phil is really teaching me that I need to get my butt down a little more, my back up, and then do more of a pull. Because when I maxed yesterday, I kind of straightened my knees out and then just had to, bend my back straight up from kind of 90 degrees, and I'm feeling it today. So that's what we're working on.
Okay, so tell us who you are and what you're working on.
Justin Hess. I'm working on a clean and press, something that's been very new to me considering from a football background. I learned how to do the power clean, so it's a new form of function of dropping underneath the bar and resetting to actually do it properly and make it look good. So,
what's the hardest part for you?
Getting my mind to work with the body, learning the movement. Basically, I'm slow at that when it comes to, especially technical lifts. Or
I saw Phil suggesting keep elbows up, elbows out. Do you feel like is that weird for you?
Yeah, I don't have the mobility for it. And like he was talking about, you don't want to catch your collarbone. I'm only training at 95 pounds already, and I've caught it on my collarbone. I can imagine the elite guys catching, 200 kilos on their collarbone. Yeah.
You said you're used to power cleans. Do you feel like it's having to unlearn what you learned a little bit, like you've got habits in place?
Definitely, because, like as a lineman, I learned to just shoot up real quick, where this is more using a hip drive to get underneath the bar versus trying to have a powerful explosive outwards.
Right.
So it's just trying to get under something versus just exploding it forward.
So the goal, the intent of the lift is actually different, right? It's to make the lift, not to train something else.
Yeah, it's completely different.
Okay, so maybe tell everyone who you are, what you're working on, what did you learn today?
My name is Elisha Hess, and I learned something completely new, Olympic lifting. We worked on our snatch today. I think I got all the way up to over 53 pounds on my snatch. Lots of repetition, but it was super fun. I think I'll keep doing it. So,
what was most surprising about it, or most difficult for you to overcome?
Unlearning all the other lifting techniques that I've learned over the last couple of years. It was very difficult to loosen up in ways that you don't loosen up when you do powerlifting. I get to use my flexibility a lot more, which is unlike what you get to do with bodybuilding and powerlifting, so that was kind of cool.
Okay, so briefer episode this week. Just didn't want to leave you hanging since people were off at seminars and working. If you like that kind of stuff, interviews or on-site stuff from a strength seminar like that, we'll probably bring you something next week related, something similar and updated from that. If you really care, you can send an email, lawnman7@hotmail.com, and say, yeah, more of that, please. You're always talking about like nutrition stuff, or you guys are waxing philosophical about aging or something like that. We can get more into the lifting stuff as well, for sure. I mean, this strength and muscle sports are so broad. Anyway, I'm not going to drone on. Thank you for listening this week. We'll be back next week with some more, and we'll see you then. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.